Could you tell me who you are and what you do and who you work for?
Sure. So I'm Caroline Bragg. I'm the Chief Exec of ADE, a trade association in the energy sector.
Could you tell us a little bit about your role, what you currently do, and what that encompasses, and what keeps you motivated day to day in that role?
Sure. So I'm the chief exec of a trade association. So we represent about 150 companies who are investing in energy decarbonisation. More specifically, and particularly for this discussion today, I represent two big areas that are, I think, some of the most exciting parts of the energy sector today. So ADE Heat Networks, that's all about how we take a strategic view to how we decarbonise heating, whether that's in our new buildings, our estates, our campuses, even to our towns and cities. So that's the first side. And then AD Demand is all about how we get to a point where households, businesses, and industry have the route that works for them to decarbonise. And through that decarbonisation, they can take part in the grid, provide their flexibility to keep the lights on, and to reduce their cost. So those are the two things I do. I think the thing that keeps me motivated, so many things. I love working in energy, actually. So I guess as overall, I think I'd never want to work in something that wasn't about decarbonisation. I think it is the challenge of our time. But more than that, I think, specifically on energy, it's a fascinating space that is so fast moving. The people are so interesting. It's a wonderful place to work, and I think consistently challenging, and something that you would never ever get to the point where you felt, oh, I've mastered the energy system now, I'll go on to something else.
So, how have your career choices led you into this current role, and what kind of inspired you to move into this sector?
Sure. So, I mean, I started way back when I was actually working in local authorities, and then in the charity sector, doing quite random things, actually. I used to do regeneration projects, basically putting in parks and little playgrounds and stuff like that in housing estates in Hammersmith and Fulham for a bit. That was great. I love that because the really big thing about that was that it felt that I was doing something that was important and meaningful, that meant I needed to interact with real people about what they were doing, and it was set up in such a way that I felt was correct, and that communities had a big say in what was going to happen, which I still feel is quite important. After I did that for a little bit and just felt it's not quite the kind of content and the kind of substance that's really inspiring me. And so I went to do my master's, found out about energy and how perplexing, bewildering it is, and thought, all right, this is my thing. This is a fascinating thing to work in. And then started to work in energy, first actually in a trade association for renewables, and now here. And that's been me for the last 7 years.
And how did you make the transfer from renewables to ADE?
So I was always really interested, even when I was working on renewables. I was always really interested in the kind of the nuts and bolts of how the grid works, of how renewables really participate and can be more integrated into the system. It's considered a bit weird in that respect. Everyone wants to work on the CFD and the sort of super sexy stuff. And I was like, no, I want to work on these like ancillary service stuff, and through that, I think the thing that I think is so important in terms of particularly when you look at energy efficiency in the round, when you look at flexibility, what we're talking about is not actually, can we put a subsidy here to move the market a little bit here, can we put a subsidy here to move the market in a slightly different way. What we're talking about is fundamental rewiring of our energy system and the way in which it is structured to make it so much more elegant, more efficient, fairer than it is today. And that is the golden stuff, right? That's the stuff that we need to really get to, this fundamental change to how things move forward. So that's, I guess, why AD has stuck.
What have been some of the biggest challenges you faced as a woman in this industry? Because it is quite a male-dominated industry. Now, I don't know if you've come across that in your area, but have you?
Um, it's been interesting. I think it's particularly when I've been kind of doing energy policy, I have mostly been in policy working groups, working with government, where I have to say, compared to some of the the stories I hear, say from colleagues who were more on the engineering side, for example, I have had very little experience of any difficulties. I think the only thing I would say with that is that I joined at the same time as another woman. We were both made senior policy officers, and we replaced a head of policy, simply because we were both at quite an early point in our career at the time. We have both gone on to be chief execs of the ADE, so those were good hires. I would say so. But I remember my very first event. I was talking to a very elderly gentleman who'd been part of the broader organisation, was a stakeholder, and his response to me saying, I've just been hired with this person is, they had to get two women to do one man's job. Did they? But I consider that I got the last laugh in this situation, so that's fine.
Exactly.
And I think more seriously, what I would say is I think I feel really quite privileged for the experience I have. I come from quite a privileged background, and I think my experience for the most part has been very supportive in the energy system.
What do you think have been some of the greatest achievements in your career so far?
Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the things that I feel like I've overcome. Maybe that's a bit better. I think the things that I have learned the most, I guess, over the course of last almost sort of 10 years or so that I've been in energy. I think firstly, particularly for anyone who is starting out in their career, it is never as bad as you think it is. I remember when I was first starting out as a policy person, I thought I'd done something horrendous. At the end of a few months of working a number of jobs because of things that were happening at the time, I thought the world had fallen in, but it hasn't. It's all right. Things move on, and I think as you learn, I think, and develop, you get to a point where you're like, it's all right. There is always a way in which this is actually going to be okay. I guess I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I did, and one of the biggest things that I learned from, I guess. I think second thing I'd say, I think the second mistake I think that I have made that has been a big one, and that I have feel, no, I've learned from it and I am a better person, is when you know that something is right, you should just go for it. I think, over the last few years, I first started as interim chief exec in this role, and are now been made permanent. I think, it's interesting whether, kind of, sometimes the leaders I talk to who are also women, maybe they feel the same a little bit. But I think there's still a sense where we put barriers in front of ourselves that aren't actually there. And don't need to be there. And I think certainly when I was interim chief exec, I felt constrained from the kind of decisive action actually I should have took. So I guess the big thing I've learned from that is, if I feel it's right, and I know, I've thought about it a lot, I've taken advice, just go for it. I shouldn't be. We shouldn't be putting these kind of barriers in front of ourselves. Other people can go do that if they choose. So I guess I think those are the two big things as I reflect on the last kind of 7 years or so.
Do you think your leadership style has changed at all over the period you've been working?
Oh, absolutely. I used to be an absolute nightmare as a as a manager. I used to be awful. I had a real I think when I first started managing, I had this, you look back on it, you're just so ashamed. I had this real sort of like, there are certain things that are just me, and people can sort of manage around those, basically. And I think one of the wonderful things, I used to manage someone who I found so enormously challenging as a person to manage. I just real clash of personalities. I found them just really high maintenance, very intense to work with. But I think about it now and I think, gosh, that, the year or so that I managed that person, I probably learned more than, managing someone who's quite sort of close to my personality would have taught me in, 3 or 4 actually. And I think the most important things, I think, what that person really, really taught me was it is just, if you get someone to a point where they feel, actually, I feel I'm safe, but I also feel that I can sort of have some autonomy and my own view about where I want to take stuff. When you get someone feeling like that in a team, it's just such a beautiful thing. They start like, they've got gorgeous ideas and they're really kind of, they want to do stuff that feels like their own. And that's like, that's like gold dust. That's the gorgeousness if you can get there. I mean, obviously I'm now in a sort of, the role I'm in at the minute is fascinating because leading an organization is in some respects very, very different from kind of one-to-one, really kind of quite intense relationships with the people that you might manage directly. I guess is what I found the most, I think, is I think I naturally have, or try, I guess, from my experience and stuff like that, I quite like to be collaborative. I work in a small organization. I feel quite strongly that everyone should have their say in where we go as an organization and our kind of where we take things. I think the thing I have realized, I guess, over the last 2 years is, not everyone wants to not everyone wants to be like, I have a very strong opinion about what we're doing here at a strategic level, and that's fine. That's chilled, and I think providing spaces where people feel like they are still really contributing, but in a way that they want to, which is not necessarily, kind of having big thoughts about the big strategic picture. There's softer, quieter ways to, and a whole diversity actually by which you can contribute to the overall direction of an organization. So that's the thing I take away from the last 2 years the most at the minute.
So in terms of advice for young women, aspiring to enter the field of energy efficiency, your field or the wider field, what advice would you give them?
Firstly, come, we need so many people. This sector is exploding at the minute, and it is such a fascinating place to work. So the first thing is, yes, come. The second thing I think is, I would say that I think the people that I respect the most, I think, are people who can look at this sector from quite a number of different perspectives. I think you can go really deep into the kind of the energy sector, and that works for lots of people. But I think the ability to kind of see analogies in different areas that might actually take us a bit further forward is extremely useful. So particularly if you're at an early stage in your career, making sure that you're getting a bit of a mix of your experiences, I think is quite useful. I think more than that, I think the my colleague has this phrase which is suck up to everyone all of the time, which in a more serious way is that the energy sector is great, right? Almost everyone I meet in the energy sector is a great person who is doing this for the right reasons, who's trying to push things forward. And so I think, your ability to develop relationships, particularly at an early stage, those relationships have seen me through, quite a lot, and are really important as you start to build your kind of your credibility and your ability to make an impact in this sector.
In terms of key skills needed to succeed and potential tools and techniques, is there any that you could recommend that would help people accelerate their careers?
Obviously I sort of, I come from a kind of trade association background in that respect. I mean, I think, there are some core skills that you will need anywhere, and are also true in energy. So, kind of strong analytical skills, your ability to understand, what is often a lot of technical discussion, even in kind of the policy world or the comms world that I live in, your ability to think quite critically about that, I think, is quite important. there is a lot that is talked about in terms of energy, and you being able to understand what you think is true is really important. My view of it, and of the people who come through this organization and that I meet, I think basic communication skills are also really, really important. I think even if your job is not communications focused, it is so important, particularly as you start to become more senior, that you're able to think very clearly about how you influence, how you can get your points across in a way that means something to the people that you're talking to. I think that becomes more and more and more important. Knowledge, kind of good critical thinking and analytical skills, at least the basics in communication. And then I would say, I think lots of the jobs in the energy sector, because things are just so busy, there is so much on. I think at least the basics of project and even program management actually will see you through pretty well.
Are there any kind of actions you think women individually can take to help themselves in terms of their career choice? Like, are there any particular courses or groups that they could join, or networks?
So I mean, a big shout out first, I guess, to the Divas. So if you are in Heat Networks, there is a great group of really inspiring and very proactive women who work in this sector. So if you're that way inclined, have a look. And there's also lots of kind of similar kind of groups supporting women in this industry across the energy sector, actually, also. I'm not sure in terms of specific courses. I think really it's just to your specific job. The only thing I would say, I think, personal view, is that especially when you're starting out in your career, it's very hard. It sounds a bit glib, but it's very hard to know what you don't know. What you will need, the skills, the way of thinking about things, your experience that you'll need in, say, 5-10 years is very difficult to understand as someone who is setting out to start with. And I think be a bit bullish, right? If there's someone who you really aspire to, you think, gosh, yeah, she or he nailed it. Have a conversation with them, see if they'll give you some pointers, or even kind of a bit more support. I think my experience, at least, is that people want to share and want to support people in this industry, and mostly if people are proactive, responsible with other people's time, you'll be met with a welcome.
Why do you believe more women should consider a career in the energy saving technology industry?
Because we're 50% of the population, right? It's a shocker that there's so few. I mean, my personal view is that everyone can contribute huge amounts, but this, and that's regardless of your gender or broader identity. The fact of the matter is that we have to decarbonize. We have to decarbonize really quickly, and energy is one of the key areas by which we can make an extraordinary impact now, in the time that we have whilst we're kind of active professionals, and therefore people should be being part and coming into an industry that needs more than ever a diverse range of experiences and perspectives to get cracking.